Welcome to Paxton House. The Sackback Status Symbol project is an exciting part of Paxton House's ongoing mission to represent women's history more fully at Paxton. This in-person event in Paxton's stunning picture gallery presented the making of an iconic 18th century gown of the type that Paxton House mistress Penelope Home wore in the 1770s. Penelope and her husband Ninian Home spent much of their time in the Caribbean, where they enslaved African people on their sugar and cotton plantations in Grenada and Mustique. Cotton dresses in the long flowing sackback style were both fashionable and popular due to how comfortable they were to wear in the warm, humid climate. Over the course of 1 week in April 2023, University of Glasgow dress history students Rebecca and Kate demonstrated how 18th century dressmakers made such gowns while wearing period costume themselves. The event came to a grand finale on Friday afternoon, with Kate modeling the completed gown, bringing the past to life as she moved through the spaces that Penelope inhabited, wearing a gown like Penelope wore. Follow along as we make a sackback status symbol. On Monday morning at 10 o'clock, we were ready to start cutting and sewing. 18th century gowns were built up by making a bodice lining that fit, and then mounting the various parts of the gown to that fitted lining. The work goes in stages, focusing on individual parts of the gown: bodice fronts, bodice back, skirts, and sleeves, and then joining them all together. While Kate leveled the petticoat on the mannequin before finishing off the waist, Rebecca cut out all of the pieces to make the bodice of the gown. We then seamed up the two pieces that make up the lining to go into the back of the gown, and built the two halves of the bodice front. Together we chatted with Paxton's guests about 18th century fashion, gown styles, how mantua makers approached garment cut and construction, the global textile trade, and lots about the people of Paxton House and the wonderful costume collection here.
And then I'm doing the other side.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And that goes over the shoulder and attaches to the back, and the back is all of the fancy flowery pleats like this. So you can see how the pleats on that are not fitted close to the body. They're actually loose. The French called the earliest versions, when they first invented this, they called it the flying dress. So this is bodice shapes, and they were cut to the figure. A mantua maker would drape pieces, just big squares of fabric, on her client's body, and then draw the pattern pieces, the shapes, on the fabric. So just with a pencil. Usually they would do it on the fabric that they meant to make the gown, as this would be the lining. So they don't survive as separate, like documentary evidence of what they were doing. They survive in the gowns that survive. So because Kate is nice and symmetrical, like the mannequin, I just draped one half of her body. So it's the first step is just to determine where the center back seam needs to go down the back and get a nice close fit, because the lining needs to fit. The outer dress is loose, but the lining has to fit, and then the gown is basically mounted to the lining. So once I've got that, and then I turn to the front piece, which is another piece of fabric, and this is all about grain line. So for this style of gown, it's got to be slightly on the bias. So I've got a line here that shows the grain line, that this is where the warp and the weft of the weave that go intersect each other at 90 degrees. This is slightly on the bias. So if this line, if you track this down, it's going to actually kind of intersect here on the center front. So that's the center front, right down the middle of the body. That's the center back, down the middle of the back. This at some point is where the side seam will be, and that's where you get a lot of curve. And this is specific to every individual. And this is the most important fitting point for the lining and the fitting point for the gown. This lets you determine what the shapes are. And so drape the sleeves the same way, just a piece of fabric looped over, make sure I know what the grain line is, figure out exactly how tall is to meet up here, to cover that whole area. It's a nice tight arm side because the tighter and higher the arm side, the more range of motion you have. It's an early form of draping. But from this, basically then I took the separate pieces and along the pencil lines that I had drawn, I put paper underneath with a pin, just pricked through the fabric to create a dotted line, and I could see the indents, the faint prick marks in the paper, and then it's just join the dots to draw out the shapes on paper. That is the actual shape, the size and shape that the finished garment piece needs to be. So it does not include any kind of seam allowance. So when you cut it out exactly on the outline. Then I lay that on the fabric that I'm going to make the gown with, trace around the fabric, and then cut and give myself that extra.
On Tuesday, Rebecca pleated one half of the back of the gown and cut out the sleeves for the gown, while Kate focused on completing the petticoat.
So that top pleat sits a quarter.
So this is going to be the center.
So what I'm aiming for is for that top pleat to be here, and I'm just checking that that is indeed, because then I can put a pin there and mark it. Okay. So template, that is a quarter of the way in.
So this is half of the back of a sackback gown. It is not flowing or hanging beautifully just yet because it's still full of lots of pins, so we'll stitch that tomorrow. So the task for the rest of the day is to build the same thing again, mirror image over on the other side. So there'll be two of these big full pleat structures down the back. We have cut the length so that there will be a little bit of a train. If it just catches the ground enough fabric to kind of grab, then it creates a lovely angle and flow to the pleats. So that will all be loose in these two big pleat structures down the back, and then to the side here it will fit close to the body. That will be mounted to the lining that fits the body, whoever the gown is made for. Visitors can get an idea of what the front will look like. The petticoat is nearly done. She's just finishing stitching the waistband effect on. So that would be what fills out here. So the skirts of the gown will come around really, really full and then stop about here, and they'll be open, and the petticoat will show down the middle.
So this will be the front, and then this is the back. So I'll stitch it down, and then it gets flipped to the inside and stitched again.
On Wednesday, Rebecca pleated up the other half of the back of the gown, while Kate constructed the sleeves. Kate, with her strong hands from years of millinery work, basted all of the pleats into place, while Rebecca assembled the front gown skirts with their clever flipped gores.
This length of fabric will be the front of the skirts of the gown, again, open in the middle like we talked about before. But to do it, you take a strip of fabric, big triangle, and you cut off a big angled piece of it. Just slice right through and then just swap it around. So this was the wide part that had been here, and this is now a narrow part. And what that does when you put it on the gown, this is the waist, this falls, it creates a flare. It was just a little trick they used that involved no waste of the fabric. There's no scraps. You're just slicing and then swapping the piece and re-seaming it so that it's aligned a little differently. Very clever. So in the period with tailors and mantua makers who worked in an urban center town, they would have the finished garment delivered round to the doorstep or the servant's entry or something of the house of the client, and it would be a brown paper package tied up with string. In it would be neatly folded the finished garment with underneath the scraps, and then your little bill, your invoice, itemized on top. That works well in a more of an urban center, a town, city like Edinburgh, Perth or something. But for Penelope Home here at Paxton House, she wanted a gown made. She'd summon a mantua maker to come attend to her here at the house. And so the gown would be completed and then left here. And then the mantua maker went back home or went back to Edinburgh or went on to the next customer.
I am taking out the basting stitch that's on the outside right now, and then I'll finish up. Usually you do that mainly at the end, but to show a little stitching, I'll finish up some stitching. So I'm doing a prick stitch. Here you just get a little bit from the underneath and come back through to catch all the layers.
Thursday saw the back of the gown come together.
I am prick stitching the back pleats for the quintessential pleated back of the Sackback gown. And we've got the 4 closest to center back done, and I'm working outwards. And Rebecca is putting in the front panels of the skirt on the gown.